This is Blenheim Talks, a podcast by Dutch law firm Blenheim with discussions of current legal topics and practical tips for businesses and entrepreneurs.
Hello everybody. I'm glad you're listening in to our podcast about my new book on business licenses in the Netherlands. I'm here today with Campbell Burns, my colleague, who will join in the conversation on the book. We'll discuss the main topics of the book, but we also will look to the coming year, for example, to the top 5 licenses we expect to be very interesting for you in the Netherlands. And then we will also let you know what Blenheim, my firm, does for companies in the Netherlands who are looking for licenses in the Netherlands. I'll start with a short introduction on the book. For certain activities in the Netherlands, you need a license. And companies in the EU have an advantage of the directives of the EU. And of course, a company outside the EU can establish a Dutch entity, for example, to profit from European law. In this book, I discuss the general procedures that are relevant to the application for a license in the Netherlands. And the word business licenses is actually an umbrella term for all kinds of licenses available in the Netherlands. And these licenses are actually spread out in various acts and regulations. But they all share the same characteristic, and that is that they are subject to a general procedure for obtaining a license, and that procedure is laid down in the General Administrative Law Act. And I will mention a few specific items about this procedure. When I'm talking about licenses in the Netherlands, I will give you a few examples so you know what that's about. It's, for example, it concerns financial services, building a production facility, for example, or any building at all, licenses for public transport or getting a taxi license, offering gambling services, growing cannabis, for example, is also subject to licenses, organizing a festival or a sports event. That's what we're talking about. The main issue I deal with in the book is this formal procedure you will come into when you apply for a license. For example, if my friend Campbell here would like to start a catering business in Amsterdam, then you will come into the license procedure, and several licenses are actually involved. For example, first of all, you have to look at the zoning plan to see if a catering business is allowed there, if you started from scratch. But then, of course, you will, if you want to rebuild, you have to apply for an environmental license. You will need the catering license itself. You will always be checked for your integrity in the Netherlands. There will be a probity test on your background and where the money is coming from. So it's very helpful if you first of all look what's coming to you when you apply for a license. So always check, for example, the policy on catering. If we stick to that example, there's always a policy on licenses you need, and of course a lawyer or an advisor can help you out with that. Now, a very important aspect which is of influence in the Netherlands is the EU Services Directive. That directive has actually changed the procedures we work with in the Netherlands, and I very often get the question, what does a company gain from this Services Directive? Well, first of all, the directive was implemented in the Netherlands with the Services Act. That was not a real good implementation, so we always look at the Services Directive itself. And the Services Directive actually ensures that we have transparent procedures in the Netherlands which offer equal opportunities for entrepreneurs, for businesses, and this also applies for businesses from outside the EU. And for example, incorrect licensing procedures can be tackled by someone who thinks that he's not dealt with properly by the government. So yes, the Services Directive and the Dutch Act on Services is really helpful for you and has several advantages. There are some main items dealt with in the directive. For example, the license procedures should be non-discriminatory. It should be a necessary arrangement for licenses. It should be proportional, and that can be very helpful if you are involved in a procedure. Another issue dealt with in the Services Directive is that if a license is not a scarce license, so there's an unlimited amount of these licenses available, that they can not be granted for a limited period of time. And that will be different if licenses are, for example, by their own nature, are limited because, for example, there is scarcity of available natural resources or technical possibilities. And then we are talking about scarce licenses, and that's an interesting subject because usually these scarce licenses are very profitable, interesting, and they may be the ones you want to go for. I'll just look at Campbell actually, because he has been helping me with this book because I'm not a native speaker and he is.
Hi Mark, nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you that you're with us. And I wonder actually what you find peculiar or interesting about the Dutch license procedures.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's one that I think you just touched on there actually. And one thing I find particularly interesting in Dutch licensing law is its applicability to everyday life in the Netherlands. And this is most evident for me in the concept of scarce licenses, which you just discussed. This is also something that you went into in much more detail in your last book, The Battle for Scarce Licenses. As you mentioned there, scarce licenses are in essence something that is limited for various reasons, whether it's lack of availability of public space, natural resources, technical constraints, or public policy considerations. And I think the Netherlands is very well known internationally for being a very good utilizer of the limited space it has available. And scarce licenses are a good representation of this. For instance, in Amsterdam, the number of tour boats that can cruise the canals or the number of bed and breakfasts that can operate here are all subject to scarce licenses due to the limited space that we have available here. The same goes for food vendors throughout the country or beach pavilions that operate primarily throughout summer. And by the same token, also coffee shops that sell cannabis throughout the country are also subject to scarce licenses at a national level due to public policy considerations. Because of the demand for these licenses often outstrips supply, litigation concerning these scarce licenses, as I think you touched on just before, is quite common, particularly regarding the particular procedures the licensing authority has to go through when distributing these. But I think how commonplace scarce licenses are in everyday life here and how you can see them operate, particularly in Amsterdam, make them an interesting concept, and the book goes into that into more depth.
Yeah, thank you, Campbell. That sounds really good. Scarce licenses are really an interesting subject, also in this book, and I've written another book on that in Dutch actually. I will deal with some issues which you will encounter when you are involved in license procedures in the Netherlands, and one of them, I already mentioned it, that's probity screening. And in Dutch it's called the Bibop Act. That's actually an abbreviation. And when you come across that word bebop, then you're involved in integrity and integrity testing. And especially for the big licenses, you will have to go to this bebop investigation. And actually the government then wishes to verify if you're not using the license for the wrong purposes. And they will check where your money is coming from, who your shareholders are. So this integrity test is for almost all the serious licenses effective life, and that is probably the case in other countries as well. So that's not surprising. I think another issue which you may encounter is also issues on the anti-money laundering law, which comes from the EU directive, and that law is applicable for a lot of services like financial services, for banks, lawyers, investment firms, trust traders. They all will have to face questions and forms to fill in to check that there's no money laundering involved. Even if you start with business in Holland and you want to open a bank account, you may have to answer a lot of questions. But we can help you out with that. Usually they're very long forms with questions you have to go through, and sometimes that will raise questions you may need some help with. Other issues you may be involved with are maybe the transferability of a license. If you buy a company here, or you acquire shares of a company, there may be a license in this company that will remain in this company when you take over the shares. But if you take over a company, then there's a change of ownership and possibly also of directors, and that means that you have to notify the licensing authority, and that will again trigger integrity screening, which is actually the normal procedure. A lot of issues you may, the book also mentions, are incomplete applications. You will have to fill in forms, you have to give a lot of information, and as soon as such an application is not complete, the procedure will be put on hold, and that's not in your advantage. So you really should be aware of the fact that if that is the case, you should try and make sure that your application is complete and that the procedure is running again. Before we move to the big licenses we expect to do very well this year, there's an issue I've dealt with in the book also, that's litigation. There's a lot of litigation about licenses, and it's good for you to know, I guess, that if there's trouble with a licensing authority, then there is of course the possibility that you look at your legal rights there, and there are quite a few possibilities. And one of these possibilities is that you can claim in summary proceedings an injunction from the administrative judge to help you out if a licensing authority is not doing what it should do. And that may be very helpful to get things going again. I will now come to the licenses we expect to do well in the coming year. So we made a professional top 5 of licenses, and I will ask Campbell to join in there. I will start with the number 5. And I think actually that will be the defense licenses. The defense industry, of course, has to recover from a pretty bad year, and Holland is well known for its big events. For example, festivals are very popular, and we think that that will start off really once the COVID is under control. And for example, if you want to organize a festival on the Museum Square in Amsterdam, then you are involved in the licenses. You may need quite a few licenses actually to do that. And this all depends on the municipality that you're in. And if that's in Amsterdam, then they will know how to deal with that, because there are a lot of events in Amsterdam. So yeah, I think event licenses will really hit off once there is space for that. And then the next licenses that may be involved is something, Campbell, you may have a look at.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point with events licenses there, Mark. Hopefully we'll be able to see some this year as COVID slowly drips away. But I think the fourth biggest license we'll look at for 2021 is that for mergers and acquisitions. 2020 was a particularly tough year for the mergers and acquisitions market. The economic uncertainty created by COVID-19 resulted in many parties withdrawing from deals and other deals being postponed, as it was unclear how COVID restrictions and government policies would be put into place. There was a fair bit of litigation that occurred at this time. One high-profile case in the Netherlands was heard in the Netherlands Commercial Court. It involved a Dutch holding company withdrawing from a deal worth around 169 million euros for shares in an equestrian show jumping company as a account of COVID-19, as an example. However, there's been evidence of a strong recovery of the M&A market in the latter half of 2020. This is positive news. The financial publication in the Netherlands, the FD, reported that at that time there were around 7 major deals in the pipeline in the Netherlands, 4 of which were likely to be completed by the end of the year, including the sale of giant supermarket and retailing company Hamer. There are a few reasons for this, one of which being a greater economic certainty as to which industries are affected by COVID-19 and which aren't. Another of which is a high amount of capital contained within private equity firms ready to be invested in the European and Dutch market. But that's a bit on the recovery of the M&A market. In terms of the actual licensing procedure going about this process, there are certain mergers and acquisitions. A notification will need to be made to the Dutch competition authority, being the ACM, and it will be necessary in certain circumstances. These include, firstly, where the companies involved jointly realise a worldwide group turnover exceeding 113.45 million euros. Secondly, where at least 2 of those companies involved individually have a group turnover in the Netherlands of at least 30 million euros. And the transaction is not subject to a notification obligation with the European Commission on account of the amounts involved. Now, how to go about this actual process? So mergers are reported by completing a merger notification form. So within 4 weeks of receiving this form, the ACM will inform the applicant whether a license is necessary for the transaction in question. And this will be the case if the ACM believes the transaction could affect effective competition in the Netherlands, especially by creating a dominant market position for one of the parties. And taking it back a step, in order to actually determine whether one of these merger notification forms is necessary, parties can ask the ACM for an informal opinion. And these informal opinions are then generally made public in an anonymised format. And these can also provide parties with more certainty as to what information to include in a notification form, as often not enough information is included. And this can be very unideal for parties, as it might delay a potential transaction. From that point on, the ACM will assess license applications against applicable competition law principles. Licenses can be refused, as was the case, for instance, in 2019, where PostNL initially, when it looked to purchase its competitor Sand, and licenses can also be granted, but subject to conditions. So that's a bit of an overview of M&A licensing this year, and I might go to Mark for what we think the third biggest license this year would be, which is cannabis and CBD licenses.
Yeah, thank you for that, Campbell. Number 3 indeed is cannabis in Holland. We think that will do well this year. First of all, the coffee shops in Holland are allowed to sell cannabis under strict conditions, and we've noticed that several municipalities are actually allowing more coffee shops. So that's interesting to have a look at. And then another interesting market is of course the CBD products. CBD is a substance in cannabis and is a big industry in the US. It's doing $17 billion, I think. And we've noticed that a lot of products are coming to the market, and we as a firm help out these companies to do the regulatory compliance involved in these products, especially because CBD is regarded as a novel food, and that means that extra rules are applying. Then the next big thing on cannabis is that there is an experiment in the Netherlands to grow cannabis by licensed growers. And the selection has already been done. So 10 growers are selected, and as we are speaking, they are going through the integrity process, the BBOP test I've told you about. So in February we expect the names of these 10 state growers who as an experiment will grow and deliver their products to about 80 coffee shops in the Netherlands. There are around about 550 coffee shops in the Netherlands now. So that's something quite new. And we actually have advised one of these growers. They first have applied for an exemption for medical cannabis. That was successful, and now they were selected as one of the growers, and we will await if they also pass the integrity test, of course. So yeah, that will be more business this year. And then for number 2, I turn to Campbell again. It's about financial services.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So this is a big one. So entities wishing to perform financial services in the Netherlands will require permission to do so in the form of a license, and these are applied for from the AFM, the Netherlands Authority for Financial Markets, or the DNB, the Dutch Central Bank, depending on the activity in question. So activities that will fall under the umbrella of financial services include giving financial advice, operating as an insurer, operating as a clearinghouse, or interestingly, providing crypto services for virtual currencies. Now, crypto service providers, that's quite a hot topic at the moment. It's a hot topic this week. It was in the news that Bitcoin reached over $31,000 for the first time in its history. And in the Netherlands, all crypto service providers have to be licensed with the DNB. And the DNB will aim to assess the risks of money laundering and terrorist financing within these organizations. So a crypto service provider itself means a provider of a service to exchange virtual currency for fiduciary currency, and also providers of custodial wallets, so these things that store and secure Bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies. In assessing the license, the DNB looks at several things. This includes general company data, including whether they are in fact a crypto service provider, and a copy of information such as their articles of association, the business plan, including the company's strategy, how it's governed, general compliance, including its training and auditing to ensure it is in compliance with its obligations, and then how it will deal with its risks to integrity. These include money laundering and terrorist financing, and it must also have a policy in place which it discusses how it will deal with integrity risks and perform customer due diligence and transaction monitoring, amongst other things. In addition, the DNB will look at the policymakers and co-policymakers of the company, who will be assessed for fitness, ensuring they basically have the requisite skills and knowledge to hold that position. This is a very interesting subject, and one that a license that we predict to be quite a big one in 2021. But moving on to number 1, and this is a massive one for 2021, Mark, a massive one in the Netherlands, which is the license for remote gambling, and maybe you could speak a bit further on that.
Yes, sure. Licenses for remote gambling will be the big thing in Holland. Actually, we're running behind with other countries where online gambling is already allowed and licensed, but here it has taken a long time actually. But as from March 1, everybody who's interested to get such a license can apply for it, and it will take probably half a year, the whole license procedure. and they expect that there will be about 80 or 90 licenses granted. They are dealt with by the Dutch Gambling Authority. The abbreviation on internet is KSA, and you will find a lot of information on their website. So what remote games are then allowed with this license? These are casino games in which the players play against the license holder, casino games in which players play against each other. Then we have betting on events, sport events, so that's sport betting, and then you have the betting on horse races. Other games of chance like lotteries, they are actually dealt with the regular rules we already have. The Remote Gambling Act is a new act, and that's the one that comes into force on March 1. If you want to apply for a license, please note that this should be done digitally, and the application is in Dutch, and the application cost will be 45,000 euros. And if the license is not granted, then this money will not be refunded. There is a lot of regulation on this subject. On our website, blenheim.nl, you can find various articles on that explaining the procedure, and of course we can always help you out with that. So that was our top 5. And if you are interested in more big licenses, then you have to look to chapter 2 of the book. I think I should mention that the book is available with Kluwer, that's the publisher. They have a big website, and if you look for business licenses in the Netherlands, their site will pop up, and it will be available with Kluwer as from today. And I think maybe it's interesting, Campbell, that we explain a little what we do as a law firm to help out businesses that wish to apply for licenses in the Netherlands.
Yeah, definitely.
Actually, we do quite a lot of that, and I already mentioned the example that we helped out a company for applying for an exemption for medical cannabis. That's one of the things we do. So we deal with the regulatory compliance for clients that wish to do business here. And there's a lot of regulations, and some of it may be completely different from the country someone is operating in. So that's where we help out and try to get things done here. And also with regard to incorporation, we help out companies.
We do, yeah. We regularly assist clients in all stages in the Netherlands, from the incorporation of a legal entity to the rollout of the operations of that entity and all the legal aspects involved in this. I have to say that I think the book, Mark's new book, is an extremely helpful guide in assisting parties with business licenses. As is evident in the book, the complexity of these processes, as you mentioned, Mark, make it highly recommendable to have a lawyer to assist you throughout this process. And Blenheim's administrative and international teams are here to assist foreign parties throughout the entire stage of applying for licenses in the Netherlands, making this as straightforward as possible and helping with any regulatory compliance issues that arise along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's what we wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for listening, and please tune in on our next podcast that will be posted soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Blenheim Talks, Blenheim's legal podcast. If you would like more information about any of the topics discussed in this podcast, or if you have any other legal questions, please contact us via our website or email us at mail@blenheim.nl.